who have seen in 2016 Olympic Games in Rio de Janeiro? Who watched the opening games? Who did? Not that many. Well, maybe a reminder. Can you remember that in the opening games, they used climate spiral to show what's happening in warming the earth? Who does remember right now? Oh, yeah. That was one of the first climate visualizations. That was interesting that they showed it worldwide. And it was made by Ed HAWKINS. Ed HAWKINS, afterwards, 2 years later, he made the climate stripes. Well, for people at home who are not aware of the climate stripes, I can assure you within half an hour you will know everything about the climate stripes. But actually, it's not that difficult because, well, blue is cold, red is hot, and it's changing in time. It's getting blue to red, so it's getting hotter. And that's what we're searching for. How can we explain it in a very intuitive, simple way? And HAWKINS is not here. So there goes the presentation. But he's online. Of course he's online. He didn't want to miss this thing. Ed, do you hear me?
I do. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I do hear you. Ed, I'm very glad you could make time to be here online. I understood you have a little kid, about 5 years old?
That's right.
So is that an inspiration for you to make more simple climate visualization graphics?
It certainly is. And, you know, we need to communicate to everybody, and that includes all our children in our schools as well. Yes.
Well, and today it's climate. Show your stripes day. I say it right? 21st of June.
Yes.
Why does Show Your Stripes Day? Tell me, explain us all about it, please. Take it over.
So yeah, today is a day where we raise awareness of the risks of climate change and start climate conversations. So maybe I'll share my screen. Hopefully you can all see that in the room.
Yes, we can see it.
Perfect. So obviously our climate is changing, the world is warming up, and there are international agreements to halt global warming, and the only way we can do that is by reaching global net zero emissions of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And that's a challenging task. It's going to require governments coming together. It's going to require industry and businesses coming together to act in more sustainable ways, to change their behavior, emit less carbon dioxide, burn less fossil fuels, and make the necessary changes to move to a net zero world. But we also need people, society, to come along on this journey. We need people to understand the risks. We need people to act on those risks and make the necessary changes in their own lives as well. And so I think this is why Katharine Hayhoe, who's a professor in the US, often says that talking about climate change is the most important thing that we can do. We need to encourage people to have conversations about climate change, about the risks, about the actions that we can all take, and multiply those conversations and make our politicians braver to take the necessary steps. And so one way that we can help start those conversations is by using simple visualizations of our warming world. And this is one example of the way we can do that. So these are the warming stripes. And this particular example on this first slide shows the temperature change in the UK from the 1880s up to the present day. Blue stripes are colder years, red stripes are hotter years. And these are projected giant size in this photo onto the White Cliffs of Dover in the UK, a giant backdrop for this amazing visualization to appear and to start those conversations. But so that was last year. We did this amazing projection last year. And so today, the 21st of June, is our annual day called Show Your Stripes Day, where we encourage people to use these graphics, to share these graphics, to start those conversations about climate change with their neighbour, their friends, their family, their colleagues, someone they meet in the pub. We can just use these very simple graphics to start a conversation and to encourage people to take action. Change starts with a conversation. And so this is a very large scale projection of the stripes onto the Tate Modern Museum in London, which we did last year. And we are encouraging cities and landmarks around the world to light up with the stripes. And so I'm going to show some examples in a moment, the ones that we've done this year as well. And then I'll talk a little bit about how the stripes began and how they've been used so far. So I'm going to show a video now of it's just been released online of what we did last night in London. So that's what we did in London last night. That was the BT Tower in London, which we lit up, and lots of people watched live as it was being done. And we're going to share that video very widely today, again, to just prompt people to ask questions about what the graphic means. And it's a very natural way to start conversations. People ask, what do those stripes mean? What are you wearing? What are we seeing? And so you can naturally open a conversation with these graphics. And people have used them all over the world in many novel ways, as we'll see. But we also have to talk about solutions. And so this is another large-scale projection we have completed this year. And this is obviously a wind turbine in the UK. So we decided to project the stripes onto a wind turbine. Okay, so that was what we've been up to in the UK this year. There's also going to be another famous landmark in London. The Tower of London is going to light up tonight with the stripes as well, again, to start conversations and produce some stunning images, which we hope for the media to use for themselves to start conversations in the UK and more widely. But where did it all begin? So I'm going to go back right to the beginning now to just tell a little story about how the stripes came to be and how they've become so widely adopted across the world. And it started with a simple knitted blanket. And this is a knitted blanket knitted by a colleague of mine, Professor Ellie Highwood from the University of Reading. And one of her postdocs, her researchers, was having a baby. And Ellie decided to knit a blanket for the new baby. And in the knitting community, people have used weather and climate information to make knitting patterns for decades. People often knit the temperature of that particular day in a stripe. And Ellie took that one step further and decided to knit global temperature change in this particular blanket. And she put this online and it went quite viral in the knitting community. Everyone really liked it. It was clearly a very effective way of starting those conversations. And Ellie and I discussed this at the time about the color choices and how it was so effective and why it was so effective. And then we kind of forgot about it for a while. And then a year later, I was invited to speak at the Hay Festival, which is a very large book and literary festival here in the UK. And it was a partnership between Hay Festival and some environmental scientists who were partnered with artists to put on events at the festival. And so for that, I wanted to come up with a very simple way of communicating about how the world was warming. And I recalled the blanket from a while ago and the discussions we'd had, and eventually decided on using simple coloured stripes to represent the change in temperature. This example is the global temperature change from 1850 on the left up to 2023 on the right. One stripe per year, with each stripe coloured by the global temperature in that particular year. And you can see blues and dark blues early on, and light reds, dark reds, even very darker reds towards the end, highlighting the rapid warming over the last 50 years. So I developed these graphics, and I used them during the event at Hay, and I could instantly see that this type of graphic opened people's eyes. You could see people's eyes open, the penny dropped, if you like. They understood what was happening. And with one single glance at a very simple image, you can understand what's happening. You don't need numbers, you don't need axes, you don't need labels. You can just tell a story about what the graphic means, and it's instantly understandable. The colors tell the story. The blues being cold, the reds being hot. It's a natural, intuitive graphic for talking about the change, and it naturally leads on people to ask questions about, why does it look like that? What's going on? Why are these changes happening? So it's a great conversation starter. And then later that year, the graphic was online, and it became very popular, and it was spotted by Jeff Berardelli and Bernadette Woods-Plackey. I think Bernadette's hopefully in the audience, I think. And Jeff and Bernadette and Climate Central decided that they would encourage TV weather forecasters around the world to use this graphic to start conversations from the trusted voices that are TV meteorologists. And so Jeff coordinated a whole set of meteorologists to use these graphics on the 21st of June in 2018. That was the next day that had a significance in the meteorological calendar. So that was why the 21st of June was picked. And they called it Mets Unite. So the meteorologists came together all over the world. There's pictures here from South Africa, Puerto Rico, and lots of places in the US, and the UK was also involved. So it was a global effort for TV weather forecasts to use these stripes to talk about climate change during their normal weather forecasts, and add that extra element to understanding how our weather is changing. And it was very successful. Lots of meteorologists loved using it, and they still do today. And so this really started a coordinated effort to communicate more broadly on these issues. So we now have a website, so where you can go to and get these graphics, www.showyourstripes.info, and you can see the global stripes here. That's the changing global temperature. But it's important to note that no one really experiences global temperature. We experience the change wherever we happen to be and happen to live. And so on this site, you can also find graphics for your country, wherever you live in the world, or a nearby city as well. So again, making it very local to people so they can talk about how things have changed exactly where they live, to make it more relevant to people, because people experience the change where they happen to be. And so that development from going from the big global picture to the sort of the country and the local level, I think is really, really important. So I've chosen 4 countries here as just simple examples, showing, again, the change in temperature in each of these countries over the last 100 years or more. Every country looks a bit different. The changes happen at different times. They happen faster or slower in different places, but they all show the very familiar pattern, going from mainly blues to mainly reds and dark reds at the end. Every country around the world is warming. Every city is warming. We are seeing this very clearly in the data collected over centuries by millions of individuals. Billions of observations taken with thermometers stretching back 200 years or more go into making these graphics to enable us to talk about the changes that we see. And so these graphics have been used worldwide. So today, for example, in the Netherlands, we have 2,500 people cycling and running around the Netherlands wearing warming stripes tops. The Climate Classic or climate Cycling for Climate team have put on this event for the last 4 years, and they've now got thousands of people involved. So that's a fantastic effort in the Netherlands. We've seen the Pope being given a warming stripes stole for him to wear. Also, that would happen last year as well. An organisation in Italy arranged that to happen. And there's a photo of the Pope receiving his stole there. One of the first people to use the stripes in a rather novel way was a fashion designer called Lucy Tamam, who works here in London. and she saw the stripes online, and she said that it stopped her scrolling through her normal social media feeds. It was so striking that she went, "Oh my goodness, what does that mean? What does that represent?" And she's always been a sustainable fashion designer, and so she's put on now 2 shows at London Fashion Week with outfits and dresses and other outfits with the stripes as a theme throughout. And so as a climate scientist, it was rather unusual to go to a London Fashion Week for a show. It's not normally something a climate scientist would do, but there I was watching these beautiful dresses parading up and down the catwalk. And so that started conversations in the fashion world about sustainability and what fashion can do to respond to these challenges we face. And that's a community you wouldn't normally talk about these issues, but Lucy managed to achieve that by starting those conversations. And the same happened also in music. So in the middle right-hand side, we see the Reading Festival, which is a major music festival here in the UK, and the rock band Enter Shikari used the stripes on the main stage on their big screen. And their lead singer, Raoul Reynolds, talks about climate change, talks about these graphics live on stage during his gigs because he recognises the importance of the issue. And so he's educating the fans that are there, their fans worldwide, and music lovers more generally about these risks. It's having these conversations in places you would not normally have these conversations, which is so important. And it's important because it enables conversations to happen amongst fans with a similar interest. They have a common connection. And so you're more likely to listen to someone who has a common connection with you, loving the same music. You're more likely to listen to them about the challenges and the risks than someone like me, for example, lecturing about it. Having these conversations and making those connections within the tribes in which we inhabit, I think is really important. We've got the bottom right-hand example, which is a bridge in Leipzig in Germany. And there was a crowd-funded effort to raise money to enable the bridge to be painted with the stripes, which looks stunning. You can actually see it from satellite. It's an enormous representation of these graphics on this pedestrian and cycling bridge in Leipzig. And in the bottom left, we have Greta Thunberg, whose a book that came out last year used the stripes on the cover. And so that is an edited volume of amazing essays about many different climate issues, and she very lovely chose the climate stripes for the striking cover. And in the middle on the bottom we have Reading Football Club, who are a championship team here in the UK, and they decided that they wanted to talk about their own journey towards becoming more sustainable, and they decided to put the stripes on the sleeves of their kit for that season. And so here we see a celebration for a goal, and you can see the players wearing the stripes on their sleeves, and they were wearing the stripes for the town of Reading. So they are talking about the local changes wherever they happen to be. And this prompted conversations amongst the fans. Fans were in the stands next to each other talking about the issues, talking about what the actions they were taking. Again, it's multiplying up those conversations around the world, which I think is so helpful. And so in football, so later that season, Reading played Manchester United, one of the biggest teams in the world, and the match was televised live in the UK, and the commentators decided to discuss climate change live during the commentary.
Well, you may have noticed the kaleidoscope of colour on the Reading kit. Reading being proactive in highlighting climate change. The kit this year includes what they call the climate stripes, designed by Ed HAWKINS, who is the Professor of Climate Science at the University of Reading. Each of the stripes represents the average temperature for a single year relative to the average temperature from 1850 all the way down to 2022. You may notice that the shades of blue at the top indicate cooler than average temperatures, while red towards the bottom, which is towards 2022, is where the years get hotter than average.
So fantastic to see, live commentary during a football game, again, where climate change would never normally be discussed. Hundreds of thousands of people watching that match live were given a little lesson in climate change, which was fantastic. And the world of sport has moved on, and we now have the Envision Formula E team using the stripes on their car this season. So this is an electric racing car. They compete globally, and they are very active on ensuring that they act as sustainably as they can. They encourage education, climate education. They have an organization called Race Against Climate Change, which encourages people to make promises about how they're going to change their own actions. And they've been using the stripes very actively this season to have conversations about climate change using their electric racing car. And one of the big new announcements we have today is that there is going to be a Hollywood feature film, which is using the stripes coming out very soon. So this is Ozzy, Voice of the Forest. It's a new animated family feature film, which has Leo DiCaprio as one of the producers. And it tells the story of a young orangutan who loses her home to deforestation and eventually becomes a social media influencer and journeys through the forest to try and save the forest and find her parents. And they are embarking on a very large advertising campaign using the climate stripes as a way of raising the awareness of these issues of deforestation and climate change. And the climate stripes appear during the trailer and during the film credits as well. So that's a fantastic new initiative, and again in a new area which we haven't really seen climate discussed as much as perhaps it should be. But the stripes have developed. We are always looking for new ways of using this concept to talk about climate change. We have stripes which extend backwards in time now to try and highlight the rapidity of the changes we've seen over the last 2,000 years. And so we can use temperature information derived from tree rings and other sources of information to reconstruct global temperatures going back more than the last 2,000 years. But it just highlights how rapid the changes have been recently relative to when we started burning fossil fuels at the invention of the steam engine. So again, this concept can be used to discuss a slightly more complex topic, but also try and keep it as simple as possible for people to understand. And we can also talk about wider changes. So we can also talk about how the temperature is changing throughout the atmosphere. And so here are the same stripes being used to talk about changes at the surface where we live, but also up through the troposphere, the lower atmosphere, and the upper stratosphere. And so we can see how that warming signal is happening all the way through the atmosphere, all the way through the lower atmosphere through the troposphere. And that warming is there from independent data sets from the thermometers at the surface. We can see that warming extending upwards through the atmosphere. And we see something very different in the stratosphere. We see temperatures cooling. And this is a well-known, well-understood fingerprint of our warming world due to adding carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. We expect the stratosphere to cool as a response to raising greenhouse gas levels in the lower atmosphere. And that's what we see from the data. This is a very clear fingerprint of why the warming has to be human-induced. And we can also look deeper in the ocean as well to show it's not just the surface that is warming, it's the whole top 2,000 meters and more of the ocean, which is showing a very large warming over the last 50 or 60 years. We can see that warming going deeper and deeper into the ocean and becoming more and more pronounced. It's not just the surface, it's the whole climate system which is changing. But we also have to look to the future and think about the choices we have to make. We now can think about what will the stripes look like in the future and offer some choices to people to highlight that. We have choices to make. Do we take rapid action and go to net zero by the 2050s and end up in something like a 1.5 degree or definitely below 2 degree world? And we can see that the colors stop getting darker. If we delay our actions to reduce emissions and keep on burning fossil fuels at the same rate, we'll end up in a 3 degree or more or warmer world where those stripes just continue to get darker and darker and darker, and the consequences become more and more severe. So the only option we have if we want to stabilize global temperatures and stop the consequences getting worse is by reaching net zero. And the quicker we do that, the lower the temperature rise will be. But the stripes don't go back to being blue, which is also important. We can't go back to blues essentially on any kind of human timescale. We have to live with the consequences. So when we reach net zero, we'll have to live in that warmer climate for generations. We will suffer the consequences of the choices we make over the next decade or two for generations. to come. And so it is up to us, our generation, to make those very difficult choices about whether we act or whether we delay. And
thank you almost. Ed, can you just try to finish it?
Yeah. And so, yeah, I'll just finish there then. So it's time for action. We need to make sure that people respond to the risks and decide to take action, and we can encourage people to have those conversations and prompt people to take actions, reduce their own emissions, and encourage others to do so. Thank you. Sorry for overrunning.
Yeah. Are there any questions in the audience? One question? Can you come over? Because then I don't have to run. That's more efficiency. Hi. Well, and everybody can see you at home right now, so that's okay.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, I mean, this is amazing, by the way. So how can this amazing visualization be prevented from becoming another kind of token, like the black stripe during the black square during Black Lives Matter and other similar kind of tokenistic displays of, yeah, I'm aware of this stuff, but I'm not necessarily going to do anything about it. I wonder if you have any examples that you can share on how this kind of desensitization can be prevented. Yeah, no, that's a great question. Initially, we certainly designed as an awareness raising tool, but I think we now do have to switch, and we are, to encouraging not just starting conversations, but encouraging actions. And so that's why we encourage people not only to share these graphics, but also to share what they're doing to respond to it. Talk with their friends and their family about how amazing their electric car is, or their heat pump, or how they've changed their diet and how they are feeling better about it, and tell those positive stories about the changes that are made and how it's making their lives better, how they're saving money by making these changes. So that's the type of conversation we want to try and inspire. And people will listen to people they trust, their friends, and the people who have similar interests, rather than scientists or politicians lecturing them. And so we need to essentially have a giant rock and throw it into the pond and create ripples and enable people to amplify those ripples in their own groups and own environment to encourage action and encourage our politicians to be braver.
I've got more questions. Could you give brief answers? So we can ask more questions. We saw that it's getting hotter, right? So when do you have to adapt your scale? How much darker red can it become, or do you have to adjust all the other colors in front of it?
So this year, actually, we have had to update the color scale slightly. So we've actually added a new darker red this year because 2023 was so unusually hot. So yes, we've already had to adapt it. We hope we will not have to adapt it. We try to make choices so we don't have to adapt it very soon again. But that depends on how things go. But yes.
And the football commenter said it's an average from 80-50 to 2022, and then I thought, that's not really correct, right? It's the climate average of the last 30 years.
Yeah, so that wasn't quite right. Yes, I agree. That was the only bit that he got wrong, actually, the commentator. So yeah, it was the average as 30-year average recently that the stripes use. I think he meant to say they show the temperature from 1850 up to present day. So he did make a very small mistake, which I think only you have picked up on so far.
And it's the average from 1990 until 2020?
No, so that particular example would have used 1971 to 2000, I think.
All right. So if we go heating, you have to change the average as well?
We might do, yes. We've changed it very slightly this year. But yes, it's always going to be, we might have to move it again.
And people are asking, is it possible to have it even more local for the very small cities? I know Climate Central in America makes graphs for local cities.
Yes.
In Show Your Stripes, you can go down pretty much in layer, land, a continent, land, country, no country, city.
Yeah. So yeah, we've done a lot of cities. There are several hundred, I think, worldwide. The biggest cities. We would love to make more, and so if people have particular cities they would like, then they can always ask us. but hopefully there'll always be a city nearby or your country to use. But yeah, we can't do every single town or city, unfortunately. There's just too many. But Climate Central do an amazing job in the US of making more available, yes.
And one more last question. I can imagine that data sets used in countries are different data sets than you use. What kind of choices have you made?
So where we have long time series from different countries, we've used the National Met Services data. So we've used the NOAA data in the US, we've used the Met Office data in the UK, we've used Meteo Suisse in Switzerland, we've used DWD in Germany. So where those long series are available, we have used them instead of the big global data sets.
Okay, so how much is it comparable? Oh, no, that was my last question. I'm going to shut up.
They agree very well. They agree very well, but we've used the national series where they're available. Yeah.
Okay. Ed HAWKINS, thank you very much. And say hi to your little kids. Thank you.